Okay, thank you all for joining us today. This will be recorded and made available to all of you along with the handbook following this meeting. And I'm Ashley Vandenbutty. I'm the Senior Director of Meetings and Events at APSA. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, our Executive Director, who's prepared a slideshow for us.
Thanks very much, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, I want to thank Ashley and Kristen, who are who's also on the call, for their terrific work in, well, not only leading and organizing the Seattle meeting, but also helping to put together this meeting as well. So I thank them for all the great work that they do. So, and I also want to thank all of you as division chairs. I realize that APSA is, I've been here since 2013, and in the 8 years that I've been as executive director, I've come to learn that the way that APSA organizes its conference is quite different than the way that many other associations, academic associations, do it, and that we have a much more decentralized process. And so you, as the division chairs, are really critical to putting together over 80% of the program. And so we realize how important you are to the success of the annual meeting. And so we have this division chairs meeting every year to help answer your questions, identify issues as they move forward, and give you a little bit of perspective on the annual meeting. This slideshow is intended to be interactive. I think people should feel free to ask me questions or ask Ashley and Kristen, who can also, I'm sure, help with some questions that may come up. And so you don't need to wait until the end of my presentation. And I can only see about 3 other people. I think maybe the best thing to do is to try to, if you have a question, to raise your hand use the raise hands function, and then maybe Ashley or Kristen can help identify who's raised their hand. So, but again, I do want to emphasize that I welcome questions here, and I'm sure there are issues that some of these slides will bring up issues that may prompt questions, and we can do that as we move forward. So, Ashley, do you want to add anything else before I get started?
No, I think raising the hand is a good idea. And then we also have the chat. If Kristen and I can help with some more logistical questions there, we're happy to take those there as well. Okay.
And so Kristen is helping me here and is in control of the slides. So Kristen, go ahead. So this kind of reiterates something I've just said, but in addition to Ashley and Kristen, Lynn Ann Lowry, our virtual meeting specialist, Casey Harrigan, who many of you may know, who's our Director of Member Services, Brenda Dames, who's also Program Associate Member Services, Dan Gibson, Senior Director of Communications and Marketing, and me. I will also mention one other person, Megan McConaughey, who is attending a meeting of the Congressional Fellowship Program at this time, but she has been the one responsible for over the last several years for doing the formula and doing the panel allocations. And so we'll get to that in a minute, but she has been performed an important role in putting together the annual meeting. So next slide. So I'm going to review the panel allocation process, participation rules, presentation and format, submission deadline for the 2022 meeting, and questions related to the 2022 meeting. So go ahead. So the way that we put together, the way that the panels are allocated to the section has followed a formula that's been approved by the council for many years. And I see a question in the chat. And Ashley, can you answer that question?
I was just
Uh,
typing away to answer it, but yeah, we can circulate the slides with the handbook and the recording after the meeting.
So, so the panel allocation is based on two important factors. One is panel attendance. And so normally, in a normal year when we had an in-person meeting, we would take the, for the 2022 meeting, we would take the 2021 attendance figures at panels and use that to compute your panel allocation. But because last year was a virtual meeting and this year we had this, I can only say unusual hybrid meeting, we have decided to continue to use the panel attendance figures from the last in-person meeting in 2019 in DC. And so that 80% based upon panel attendance numbers from 2019, and then 20% are based upon current year submissions. And what that means is that current year submissions would be after the submission deadline closes, it's around January 15th. I don't know the exact date, but it's around January 15th. The exact date's at the end of these slides, but it's in mid-January. Then we see how many submissions each section has received, and a 20% of their panel allocation is based upon how many submissions they get. So in a particular year, if a section gets an unusually high number of submissions relative to their traditional panel allocation, they would essentially get bonus submissions. And again, that's based upon current year submissions. So these numbers will be based upon the 2022 submissions that we receive, by the deadline in January. And so the allocations are based upon panel attendance adjusted for panel time slot when measuring attendance. So that the allocation formula does not use the raw attendance numbers. It controls for time slot, and so an 8 o'clock panel on Sunday morning is likely to get less attendance than a 2 o'clock panel on Friday. And so we control for time of day and use essentially an estimated number for what your expected attendance would be, and then use that as a basis for the allocation. I see there's a question, what counts in allocations? Do mini conferences, training courses, business meetings? Hold on one second. I got to read the whole question. So the answer is that training courses, business meetings, short courses, special grad training do not count towards your allocation. Now the mini conferences, and maybe Ashley can answer that. I think it depends upon how the mini conference is organized. Some mini conferences are where a section might, somebody might submit a proposal to have an all morning session on Friday for a mini conference on a special topic. And they would and 2 of their panel allocations would count towards that mini conference, and they would call it a mini conference on X. But so I think that's usually the way it's worked, but there are some mini conferences that have been held on Wednesday, which is generally the time for short courses, where those mini conferences have not counted towards your allocation. Ashley, do you want to add anything to that?
To boil it down a little bit, it all depends on how it's submitted. If you submit it as a pre-conference short course on Wednesday, that does not count towards your allocation. If it's submitted, business meetings and receptions don't count towards your allocation at all, no matter how they're submitted. Most everything else does. Mini conferences generally are, in most cases, have been 5 allocations. And just to kind of, again, simplify it a little bit, the allocations are essentially 1 90-minute time slot on the program. So a mini conference with 5 sessions would take up 5 allocations because it's taking up 5 time slots. So that's one way to think about it there. We do have workshops that if you submit a workshop, that means it's going to be during the event. And generally workshops have been 2 time slots. So therefore their 2 allocations are counted for it. So that's just kind of a little bit of a summary on how those count. Obviously, if you have a question about it, I'm happy to answer it. But a lot of it just depends on how it's submitted or created.
And I saw that there's a question, if total panels to allocate depends on space, can sections ask for extra virtual panels? So that gets to an important question that I'm sure many of you are thinking about, given that we ran a virtual and in-person meeting in Seattle. So, so we had about 700 virtual panels in Seattle and about 500 in-person panels. Is that, Ashley, am I correct on that?
Yes, roughly.
So we are planning on a in-person conference in Montreal with a virtual component. So in Seattle, we had approximately 1,200 panels. We estimate that we will have around the same amount in Montreal in terms of space for approximately 1,200 panels. And so we are planning to allocate 10% additional panels for virtual. So there would be 120 virtual panels, and then there would be 100, and then there would be 1,200 in-person panels. Now, when I say 1,200 in-person panels, that, and I have another slide in a moment that addresses this, but the sections get approximately, there's 1,000 panels that are allocated to the sections, and then there are theme panels, then there are APSA panels, related group panels that take up the remaining 200 panels. So we ran about 1,000 section panel or division panels in Seattle, and we would anticipate that we would be running around the same amount in Montreal. Was there another question? Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay. Next slide. So you can see this is total number of division panels. So in the last few years, we've had roughly, in the last, really since 2016, we've had roughly, give or take 30 or 40 panels, roughly the same number of panels. So, and again, that we had slightly more in DC because we had more space, and we had slightly less in 2017 in San Francisco because we were not in the convention center, but we're in hotels. And we had, as you can see, 999 panels, division panels in 2021. Next slide. So this is submissions and acceptance rate. And you can, I think it's really relatively self-explanatory. The acceptance rate of panels has been, around 60 to 65%. And acceptance rate for submissions has been somewhere, in the low 50s. We did have a drop off in submissions for the Seattle meeting, but I think that was anticipated given the complexity of the meeting and the pandemic and other considerations. We also have historically gotten attendance at the annual meeting has historically been somewhat less on the West Coast than it has been on the East Coast. So, okay. Next slide. Participation rules. So these rules were put in place to try to maximize the number of people who can participate in the program. Participation is limited to 2 roles with a maximum of 1 paper author role. So author or co-author presentations only include actual paper presentations. Appearing as a non-presenting co-author does not count against the limit. So you could be a co-author on 3 papers, but you could only give 1 presentation. And so that would be okay according to the participation rules. And then there are non-author appearances that such as a discussant or chair role does not count against the limit. Questions? Anybody have any questions about the participation rules? Okay, next slide. So this provides a lot of detail. I'm not going to read all through this, but it talks about the different participation rule exceptions. Bobby is asking, what is another role if not a paper presenter? So you could be Ashley, are you taking Bobby's question? You want to go ahead?
Oh, sure. Basically, what I would generally call them is a paper author role. You get 1 paper author role. So if you're a paper author who's presenting that paper, I know it's confusing because you're still presenting a paper. So that's why I try to use paper author when possible. And then a presenter would be like if you're on a roundtable and you don't have a paper you're presenting, but rather discussing a topic. That's generally the most used case of it would be a roundtable or an author meets critics panel, for example. Those are usually when we see a presenter role that's not a paper author role. And just to reiterate, even if you have presented 1 paper, if you have a colleague who's on your paper and you have a second paper, they can list you as a non-presenting co-author. So you could still have your name in the program, you just wouldn't be necessarily presenting that paper as the author.
Any other questions on this? And again, we'll make sure we circulate these slides so you can use these as reference. So, okay.
One more thing, if that's okay. We have a website online that will circulate as well when that's ready, and that will have a page that shows each of the format types and then what kind of roles are associated with that when people submit or create, or when you go to create panels.
Okay, Kristen. Available proposal types: paper, iPoster, full panel, roundtable, workshops, mini conference. But a mini conference doesn't necessarily have to be full day. You could do a mini conference, a half-day mini conference as well. Questions on this? Okay, next slide. So this is the annual meeting title for next year: Rethink, Restructure, Reconnect Towards a Post-Pandemic Political Science. Program chairs are Cherie Wallace from the University of Louisville and Pei-Ti Lien from UC Santa Barbara. It'll be September 15th through 18th, which I'm sure all of you know, which will be off Labor Day, but about 2 weeks earlier than the Seattle conference. And then the 4th annual TLC at APSA, Teaching Learning Conference at APSA, will be Saturday, September 17th. Any questions on this? Kristen, go ahead. So we're working on the call for proposals. We're hoping to open it sometime in the next couple of weeks. January 18th is the call for proposals closes. And then proposal review begins. So it's that week between the 18th and the 25th where we analyze the submission figures. And so we would be sending you your panel allocations by January 25th, probably a day or 2 before that. February 28th is the panel construction deadline, and then mid-March program proposal notifications get sent. Any other questions?
Steve, if I may, can I add a couple of deadlines in there? Again, I don't want to overwhelm the slide with too many dates, but just to kind of fill in some of the gaps there between January 25th and 28th. We do have a deadline for submitting panels, for example, to a theme panel. You're welcome, once you get your proposals, to review those starting on January 25th to see if any you believe fit the theme really well. And if they do, you can elevate them up until January 31st. This is a good opportunity for you because if the program chairs decide it's a good fit, it actually doesn't count as one of your allocations. But the attendance from that session will still count towards your allocation for future years. So there's a benefit to doing that, and you'll be listed as a co-sponsor, so you get the cross-marketing and the system of being listed as a theme panel and with your division. So I highly recommend, if you have the time to do that, to go through between January 25 and January 31st to look at those panels. Just another little deadline we have in there is February 16. That's going to be the day in which we recommend you do a first round of review. This way, if you reject something or don't think it's a good fit, it gets that second choice review that we have in the system. And that makes sure that everybody gets 2 sets of eyes at least on their proposal. And then again, February 28th, we hope to have everything completed. These deadlines, I know I just ran through a lot of them, will be again in the packets you'll be circulated as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? So let me address a couple broader questions. So again, I'm sure some of you are wondering about why we're doing a primarily in-person meeting with a virtual component. So we did, I think, to the credit of Ashley, Kristen, and really I guess I would say almost the entire APSA staff, we did put on, I think, a successful conference in Seattle. But running a virtual / in-person meeting like that is very expensive, very staff intensive, and it's not a sustainable model that you could continue to hold meetings like on. And so we recognize that there will be continued demand for virtual sessions for a wide variety of reasons, including difficulty in travel, climate change and carbon footprint issues. I mean, I think that accessibility, I think there are a wide variety of reasons why we want to continue to go forward with not only having virtual panels, but we also plan to increase the number of panels that we live stream. Such as which we did this year with the presidential address and the plenary sessions. And we're certainly planning to increase the number of live streamed events. So that's why we're planning, again, an in-person meeting with an important virtual component. The other issue that you may be thinking about is in terms of preferences of people who submit panels and individual papers. You may recall that for the 2021 meeting, at the time of submission, we asked people's preferences for virtual, in-person, or no preference, right? It was no preference, right, Ashley? Am I correct? It was no preference?
It was either.
Either, okay. So, and we got, the answer was about 25% said in-person, 25% said virtual, and then about 50% said either. And then when we put the program together, it was about 50-50 virtual, in-person. But we found, and again, this is no surprise to any of you on this call, but people's preferences change. And it became very difficult to manage the program in a situation where people were changing their mind about what kind of panel they wanted for a wide variety of reasons. And of course, the pandemic was probably number one, but again, there were a wide variety of reasons why people changed their mind about what format that they wanted to present in. So we've decided that at submission this year, we will not ask people their preferences. We are planning a primarily in-person meeting, but then you as the section chairs will be in control of allocating some virtual panels, and you can use their discretion in terms of how you allocate those panels. Again, that's why we are not asking for preferences at submission time this year, as in contrast to what we did this past year. Questions? Paul, I see, has raised his hand. Go ahead, Paul. I see your hand.
Yeah.
And I see you. So go ahead.
Yeah.
So, do you want to stop the screen share, Kristen? Unless people want to. Okay. Go ahead.
No, I just was wondering what that meant for the virtual component. So, it seems like from this last conference that once a few people on a panel start to bail and go virtual, then the whole thing kind of disintegrates. So, which is understandable for the virtual people, but also kind of not super fair for the people that do actually show up and then realizes they're in an empty room. So is there any guy? I guess it's up to our discretion, which is nice, but is there any guidance in terms of, you can't really have half a panel be virtual? Do we need to have, like, if it's going to be virtual, the whole thing be virtual, and we give people enough advance notice so people don't fly to APSA under false pretenses that there's going to be someone actually there? Or I don't know if there's any thought been put into that issue. Thanks.
Steve, you want me to take it?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, more or less, we did think about this, and it is obviously, again, discussion can be a little challenging at sometimes too, making those calls. What we were thinking was, one, that you would be focusing on maybe a panel that would have a wide range of appeal to the various divisions and sections of the discipline. And then once you've selected that, just reach out to those presenters and just tell them that they're going to be one of those virtual allocations, and just let them know. And that way, if there's any pushback or concerns about it and they really wanted to be in person, we can look at maybe making them one of those in-person allocations and moving somebody else to that slot, again, with advance notice.
Paul, does that answer your question?
Sort of. So the idea is that it's a panel has broad appeal, so it's the more popular the panel we think it's going to be, then that's the one that we should put virtual, I guess. I don't know.
No.
Well, I don't want to take up too much time. I can ask you offline if everyone else is not having the same question, but yeah.
Steve, did you have something?
No, go ahead. I thought you were going to say something.
I think my thought with that was that just that because the benefit of doing the virtual is that you get a recording afterwards that's available for up to 6 months. So if it was a topic that you feel would fit in well with the theme really well, that would kind of be the type of panel I would envision, and like not considering other factors that will go into this decision as well. That'd be my initial kind of review standpoint for what I would make virtual, because that way you have that 6 month recording up there for attendees from across the discipline to access throughout.
Thanks.
Okay. Other questions? I think, did somebody else have a?
Looks like we do have a couple of questions in the chat as well. One of them, how many European and Asian participants do you expect? What's the plan B if the pandemic continues?
Well, that's a good question. We are in Montreal, so I do think that it will attract a significant number of international attendees, and including, all of us from the US, it'll be international. We're all international, right? So going into Montreal. So I do think that Montreal will be a popular place. And we're in the convention center downtown. Now, in terms of the course of the pandemic, I think it's our hope that the pandemic will ease and international travel will become easier, and And as a result, by the time our meeting rolls around in almost a year, then it'll be much easier for people from Asia, Africa, and Europe to travel to North America and to travel to Montreal, and much easier for US citizens to travel to Montreal. Now, if the pandemic, flares up again and or a new variant arises, I think we would then deal with that as it arose. But at the moment, where the plan is that travel restrictions will ease and people will feel more comfortable traveling to an in-person meeting. Ashley, do you want to add anything to that?
Obviously, we've dealt with basically every circumstance at this point when planning the meeting in the last 2 years, in terms of contingency planning and thinking through. So I think, again, as Steve said, we'll be flexible to what pops up based on local, state, and federal and even international guidance.
Okay, I see Mikhail has his hand up. Oh, you're muted.
That was my question about European and Asian scholars. Just for your information, it's incredibly difficult now to get American visa. I don't know about Canadian, or therefore most people would not be able to come. That's a matter of fact. It's just not possible to get visa because the delay demand is so huge, not just academics, but anyone. There is a huge waiting list to get visa. So what to do? Not to accept them? Because for sure they will not come. That's just impossible. What would be your recommendation?
One thing we'll focus on, because as Steve said, with the US participation as well, there's passports and that takes time and people need to make sure they have the right dates on those, is really getting the word out there early on that we are in Canada. There are these additional things to consider and look at. The visa time has always been something we've had to pay attention to, and I realize it's especially a concern right now, but we'll continue to monitor that. Steve, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
No, I think that's fine. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Other questions?
Do you have some more in the chat? Let's see, the next one. Why not allow someone to flag virtual only? It seems easier for the division chairs to make a virtual only panel. And also a note about that they are also worried about the international colleagues as well.
Steve, you want me to go?
Why don't you go and I can add anything, go ahead. I'm pulling it up. So go ahead. Go ahead.
A couple of things there. I think one, once you have people select virtual, it sets an expectation that will indeed be the case. We've had when there are resources allocated to each type of presentation. The second thing I'll add is that was such an unreliable data source in the end from January 21 to September 2021. It changed drastically. And one thing I keep telling our team when we're thinking about this is this time last year, we didn't have vaccines even, or they were just starting to come out. And here we are now with boosters in the US, and I know we're hoping to get everybody else or get them all around the world. We'll be working on things with that as well in terms of how do we accommodate audiences. But I think again, that data set changed so much in those 9 months that it's not a very helpful indication. Especially, I wish I had the luxury of time of having more time that we could push this indication to June. But when you're planning a 1,200 panel event, there are so many deadlines that roll off of that it's just not feasible for us to ask that at a later date and still do this whole panel construction process we're talking about. So I don't know, again, that's that reliable of a data set at the end of the day. And again, my other concern is just that it sets expectations that we'll be able to accommodate everybody who checks that off.
Got a couple more
Whoever-
questions in the chat. Oh, sorry.
I was
Steve.
going to, whoever asked that question, did Ashley address that question? Whoever asked that question? I don't have the question in front of me here.
Sure. Yeah, it was my question, if you don't mind me addressing
All
it.
right, go ahead. Go ahead.
One reason that I think I'm concerned is I'm part of another association for Slavic and East European studies. And right now we're having an issue because Russian citizens don't have access to a WHO approved vaccine. And there are other places around the world that I think are sort of stuck with this. And so I do understand the how difficult it could be to ask someone's preference and then have it changed. But you could make it so that the virtual option is, if you select this option, you cannot change it, and try to make it clear, because there will be some people sort of stuck in limbo. That was my concern.
I understand your point. That's a good point. And we did in fact have a couple, you know, at least a few people who were not able to, well, apart from the separating out the visa issues, we did have a few people who actually could have attended from other countries, but did not have a WHO visa vaccine. And so they were not approved to attend the conference. So, I think you raised an important point. I'm happy to talk subsequently to Ashley about how we deal with that. So, Ashley, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Not at the moment. I have to think that through a little bit more, because it gets tricky when you're asking, if we're asking justification on it. Again, just thinking through the amount of resources it would require if you have 50% of the people at the gate asking to go virtual and 50% want to do in-person at the current time, and then seeing shifts in that later, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah. So, okay. I think, I'm not sure, Kristen, you want to read the next question? I did see that Pei had raised her hand. So.
The next question was actually Pei's question, so I'll let him go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, hi, thank you. Actually, I was going to make a sort of recommendation that, to address the previous concern that perhaps we should have a column or place for people who submit the proposal to justify if they can only attend virtually, that we need to know the reason why. So make it harder for people to actually can pick the virtual option. So make them think, at least in terms of why they want to do that. I understand, of course, it's very difficult. It's kind of unfair to not allow people to change their mind, particularly if they are originally virtual, can actually attend in person, right? That's actually what we want. We would definitely like to encourage people to be able to attend in person, but we need to some information and to allow people the possibility to also express their concern. So perhaps just a separate column or place that people can actually just type in the reasons why they would do certain things. And then actually it's kind of related then to my question is really concerning whether or not we have the capability to offer hybrid panel, so that our organizers do not need to worry about if they assess certain people, whether or not this can only then drop out because they cannot attend in person. And so I understand it's cost more money and whatever, but can we consider that, even though we cannot make decisions right now? I just wonder whether or not when we define virtual, do we actually include also hybrid format?
So Pei, I've come to find that hybrid means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So by hybrid, do you mean that you would have people in person in Montreal, and then let's say 2 panelists were in person, and then you'd have 2 people on the screen who were zooming into the meeting? Is that what you mean by hybrid?
Yes.
So that gets complicated and expensive, and I think it does raise the issues that I'm not saying that we will not do any hybrid meeting, any panels, but I'm just saying that doing it on an extensive scale raises the concerns that Ashley mentioned about people changing their mind. And if 2 people are in person and two people are virtual, then the in-person person says, well, why should I go? I can just do it all virtually. I mean, we had countless examples of that in Seattle. And so it just gets very complicated to actually do it in practice. Again, I'm not saying that we won't do any of it, but I think we have found that particularly with the Seattle meeting, that it was very difficult to, once you start that process of giving people choice about hybrid panels, then it becomes very difficult to manage. And it means that you also have the problem that was identified by one of the earlier speakers, that you have a panel on the program that's hybrid, but then you go to the in-person panel, and then both of the panelists that were there decided that they'd do it virtually, and so then you don't have any in-person presentation at all. So it's complicated, and I think that there is a role for certain types of hybrid panels. And I'm happy to talk about that, but I think that Ashley's point that doing it on an extensive scale it's also very expensive, because you have to, the AV charges for the hotel are through the roof. And so if you have, I mean, because you need more bandwidth in order to do a lot of them, and to do it reliably. And so it also becomes very, very expensive very quickly. So, Ashley, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it well.
Thanks for the question, though, Pete. Well, and I also want to formally acknowledge Pete here, who has agreed to be one of our program co-chairs, and thank her already for all the work she's done. And then Cherie is on the call. I see Cherie is there. She is. So thanks to Cherie at University of Louisville. So
Thank you.
okay.
All right, two more questions in the chat. The next one is just curious about rules regarding co-sponsored panels. I remember that APSA changed the rules a few years ago regarding how to count those panels.
This is always a complicated question, and I wish one of our other staff persons, Megan McConaughey, was here to answer this question. But it is true that we did change the way we did co-sponsorship, but I think why don't I say this, and then Ashley or Kristen can add on to this. But essentially, the way it works now is, if you have a panel, if you're a section chair and you want to co-sponsor with another section, you can co-sponsor with as many sections as you want, and it doesn't count against your allocation. So let's say you had a panel on populism in advanced industrial countries, and you were the comparative politics section, but you also wanted to do it with what used to be called comparative democracy. I now think it's called autocracy and democracy. But you could sponsor it with 3 or 4 other sections if you wanted to. I mean, that's pretty uncommon, but the more there's no limits under the current rules to how many sections you can co-sponsor a panel with. And many sections do it because it's a way of increasing the audience for a panel. And so co-sponsorship in that way does not count against your allocation. So I think that under the new rules, there's an incentive for co-sponsoring. What it doesn't do, which you could do under the old rules, is that through co-sponsorship, you could essentially try to add to your allocation, and you can't do that under the current rules. You get an allocation, let's say you're comparative politics and you get 50 panels, you can co-sponsor with, again, as many sections as you want, but you as comparative politics will still have 50 panels. Ashley, did I get that right?
Yeah, basically whoever is housing that panel, they use their allocation. Anybody who's listed as a co-sponsor, so whoever created or accepted that panel, whatever division that is, their allocation counts. Any of those co-sponsors listed, it does not count against them. For this reason, we kind of see a trade generally in which one division will say, I have this panel that I think you'd be a good co-sponsor on, and the other one will say, this might be a good fit for you. That way, they're both getting the benefit of the co-sponsorship with the cross-marketing. And then, of course, the attendance from both of those counts towards your allocation in the future. Oh, I
Thank
think
you.
there.
No, go ahead. Kristen, go ahead. I think there's another question you had.
Oh, no, I think the individual who asked the question was trying to speak, but I think you're muted.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry. Thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to ask about the attendance. So let's say you split you co-sponsor with somebody else, and there's like 100. I mean, not 100, but 50 people in attendance. Does that number 50 get added only to the main division that's sponsoring the panel, or does that get split in two? Like, how does that work in terms of for the formula for like the next year, for example?
Ashley, do you want to answer it?
I believe the full attendance number counts towards all groups. Again, Megan would be able to comment on any other caveats to that, but that was my general understanding. Megan is kind of our formula expert here.
Right. But the way to understand it is if you put on a popular panel and got 100 people to come to the panel, the attendance would count towards your panel allocation in the formula. Does that answer your question, Antoine? Oh, so I think the way to understand it is that if you had 100 people attend your co-sponsored panel that you had, and you were the home section for that panel, then the entire 100 would count towards your panel allocation formula. So I think we've momentarily lost Antoine. He hopefully he can return. So Kristen, is there another question?
Yes, we have just two more. Will there be APSA guidance on the additional considerations for travel to Canada that those who submit to the conference should consider?
Yes, and go ahead, Ashley. Ashley's already been working on this, so Ashley, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot more to consider with COVID. We have obviously passport visas and things like that to consider for majority of our attendees. I think in general, we have 200 Canadians out of 7,000 attendees. So basically it's a mostly international conference. The other consideration again is health and safety and where Canada is on their vaccine guidelines right now as it stands. Is there, I believe, a number of vaccines that they have approved. You have to be fully vaccinated to come in, and you do have to take an entry and exit test. An entry test to get into Canada, this is from the US, an entry test to get into Canada from the US, a COVID test, and one to return to get into the US currently via plane. Obviously, as I said earlier, we didn't have, the vaccine was just rolling out at this time last year, and here we are now. So this is likely to change guidance here as the months come, and hopefully for the better. We'll continue again to monitor that.
And one last question in the chat: when and how would section chairs know the number of their panel allocations?
So the submission deadline is on the 18th of January. And then we immediately begin the process of analyzing the submission numbers and running the formula and achieving a final number for each of the sections in terms of their panel allocation. So you should have that by a couple of days before the review process begins. So I'm guessing like January 23rd, 22nd, something like that. So we've been able to turn around the allocation process in about 4 to 5 days. So.
And just an add note, if you get any questions on logistics or things like that about traveling to Canada, Chris and I are always happy to take those. If you have a lot on your plate and don't have time to answer them, this is something we always tell our program chairs as well. We're happy to help you with those responses if needed.
Okay. And Bobby asked a question that I'm happy to stay on if people have, after the main portion of this meeting is over, I'm happy to stay on and ask individual questions from individual sections. So any other questions in the chat, Kristen? Pei or Cherie, do you want to say anything in conclusion?
Oh, I just want to thank everybody for your volunteerism. Yeah, that's really grateful for that.
Absolutely, and I second that. And if this is your first time to it, you'll find that all academic is a little cumbersome, but once you get the hang of it, it kind of works itself out. And please share with each other, those of you who have done this before, kind of help out those who are first timers. But, if there's a panel paper that you think may work well somewhere else, send it over to that other section so it doesn't just get thrown away. We want to give as many people as possible an opportunity to participate in the conference, because for some people this is obviously counts a lot, sometimes in terms of the promotion and tenure. And so we want to make sure that as many people as possible have that opportunity. But as you said, this is very fluid where we are, because one, we're going outside of the United States during a time when we're still in a pandemic. So we don't know how this is going to look, but we didn't know how it was going to look last year. And it turned out to be fabulous, right? It was a very good conference, well attended, a lot of good papers, etc. So let's just kind of keep that, type of attitude and just believe that this is going to get done. And I know that it will, because we always seem to make it happen, right? So thank you all again. As I said, if you have any questions, believe me, Ashley and all of APSA, the staff that work, they can help you with this. I've been where you are before. And so just don't get frustrated, just reach out. They're going to answer any questions. And as I said, talk to each other as much as possible. Thank you.
So thank you both for that. We appreciate all of your help too in leading the conference. And again, as I said, thank you all for volunteering as division chairs. On that note, we will have a nice on-demand webinar that we put together about how to use All Academic. And Kristen has a website with all the resources on it. That way, when the system opens to you to start doing those edits and construction, the submission system that you use to submit a paper is the same you'll be using to review and construct it in All Academic. We'll have a tutorial for you on how to do that. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, even following this meeting, feel free to send them to us. And we can help you with those. I'll probably also circulate the 2020 webinar as well. I tried to get a few of our division chairs on this call from 2021 to speak about kind of workload and having managed the process. I probably reached out to a dozen people, but everybody had commitments this year. But I think that little Q&A at the end of the webinar last year could be beneficial, because it focuses more on a portion I don't see as much of more of that individual workload from the division chairs and how they manage that.
Okay. Yes, we will be sharing the slides. Thank you. Okay. All right. I'll stay on, and Ashley and Kristen, can you stay on to answer any remaining questions? Thanks to all of you for participating, and I look forward to working with you on the conference. And again, thanks for all your willingness to serve in this very important role for the program and the association.